happiness of the greatest number of people. That is what a constitution must be. And having set the objective of the constitution, you then frame a constitution to achieve that objective.
Because we really do have a race problem. Those divisions are real. We see it in our politics, we see it in our trade union. We see that they take the divisions with them. Look at where people live in this US. You have enclaves in the Bronx and in Richmond Hill and in Brooklyn. They're taking the division with them.
Women are dying in the streets, and we have a government pontificating running around campaigning for women's vote. No women should vote in this election coming up unless there is something done to the legislation as Magistrate Kim is advocating.
That voices like ours that are not in the political trench fighting it out, voices like ours should become stronger. One of the things about the Caribbean is that we have never had one discourse. Bass will know the days of the New World and the Old World and the radical left and so on. What we had was this concourse of ideas, which I think in the early days of independence pushed us in a certain direction. We've got to move back to that point of having these multiple discourses.
Good evening, good night to our viewers, and to the GlobeSpan team. A wonderful rainy evening to all of you. Tonight we continue the discussion of small parties in big politics with two of the newer political parties that have expressed an intent to contest the next general elections. If viewers would recall, last week we had a discussion with the new movement headed by Torin Durga, the Citizenship Initiative by Roel Johnson, and Change Guyana by its Prime Ministerial candidate Nigel Hines. Our sentiments in those discussions remain pertinent today. In the last 50 years, we have had large political parties managing relatively small economy. Well, one could argue mismanaging a small Guyanese economy. And the spiral downfall of the Guyanese economy and of Guyanese livelihood have been said to be at an alarming rate, and many of the new political personalities are now becoming vocal. For example, today there is a critical position at the central bank being overdrawn by $69 billion after spending a positive of $10 billion. Thus, in 4 years, this government has broken the laws of Guyana in using the central bank to lend monies to its governance. In other words, there is great concern that serious laws are being breached, and at the same time, the government has already spent $69 billion of oil money that we haven't even started to harvest as yet. The overdrawn position is basically a loan which is prohibited by the laws, and public debt is at an all-time high. The politics of this country that has one party that is in charge, creating an overarching authority for our lifestyle and livelihood, is now being challenged by the newcomers in politics. So while politics have entered an all-time low, with the race and prejudice of political personages become evident with each passing day, there are new parties and there are new persons that are coming out every day with an expression that the status quo of Guyanese politics should not and will not be allowed to continue unchallenged. And so tonight, we continue this discussion of the role of small parties in big politics and in Guyana's future big economy. And with us tonight is Dr. Timothy Jonas, chairman of A New and United Guyana, ANUG, and Mr. Chandra Sohan, one of the leaders of the Federal United Party. We call that party FEDUP. Gentlemen, welcome to our program. And before I ask you to introduce or to say a few words, I must tell you that last week we had 3 other parties and we had an engaging discussion with them on the economy, and I'm certainly hoping and looking forward to that tonight. Welcome to this GlobeSpan 24/7 program, Tim and Chandra.
Well, thank you very much, you. You gave me an honor that I don't deserve, I'm no doctor. I hope you're not confusing me with their finale.
Well, thank you for that correction. I would like to start the ball rolling by asking you two, just as a matter of getting our viewers, engaged in the vision, the short aim of your political party. Tim, for example, why didn't you seek to join one of the other parties? Why did you come to form or join with others to form a new and united Guyana?
Well, I think the summary that you gave is exactly correct. Unknown United Guyana is the first of the small parties to have been formed. Um, we were we came together in January and announced our position. And when you hear the other parties, the other small parties, I think the sentiment that is being expressed is exactly the same. Guyanese have had enough of the status quo. We as a country are 53 years old, and those 53 years have been an almost steady and continuous decline, with small exceptions. And that decline has been as a result of woeful mismanagement by the political powers that be. Um, at long last, I really believe Guyanese have recognized the harm, recognized where that harm is, and are looking for a solution, recognizing that the winner take all system of politics simply means that either the APNU takes all or the PPP takes all, and Guyana gets none.
Thank you. That is really insightful. Mr. Sohan, you want to tell us a little bit what was the driving force behind creating the new party? Why you would not have joined another party in the first place?
Well, similar to what Tim has said, and I want to just make a correction with him, is that Fed Up was formed with the first small party they formed this year. ANUG came afterwards. Anyways, on a similar notion, we have seen that the proportional representation system is not working for this country. All it has done is to divide the races of this country and draw wider ethnic divide in this country. We must recognize as well that up to 1964, we had the first past the post system. But when we were granted independence, we were given the proportional representation system. And I think this was a deliberate creation by the British to ensure that the racial divide stays where there is, and so that the people will not be focusing on issues and policies, but only on racism, and that is a cause for our underdevelopment up to today. So my position was not to want to be involved with any of the other political parties, that is the PPP or the PNC, because we believe that we wanted to chart a new course with new thinking, new foresight, and advancement to development for the future.
So you both have mentioned, a very important thing. That is that this whole the old system or the current system, the PR, the winner take all politics. It is something that you both are, well, from your own party platform, you want to advocate a change in that. However, wouldn't that require real in-depth effort for constitutional reform?
Well, definitely that is where the root of all of this will have to occur, and that is why I'm happy personally to see that there are so many new parties or smaller parties which have emerged over the past few months. And this shows clearly that there are a new breed of independent thinkers in this country with a view to want to advance the development of this country and to advance the people of this country.
Mm-hmm.
So we will have to have a complete reform of our constitution because part of the pillar of the Fed Up is that we want to reintroduce the constituency system of voting. And we are also pushing for a federal system of governance in this country.
But Tim, I mean, while I'm going to ask you to answer that same question, but a little slant, isn't that a Herculean task that might be beyond the scope and reach of the new entrants in Guyanese politics?
Yog, that is the question to ask. I think when all is said and done, there are very few Guyanese who will say to you that they're happy. Most of them will say they're not happy. When you go around, you see people dejected, oppressed, depressed, and poor. Why is it that we vote the same way? And the answer comes back. These little parties, these small parties, can't change anything. We have the rules of the game. How is a small party going to make a change? That you've asked exactly the question that every Guyanese is asking, because the Guyanese people aren't happy, but they're skeptical. And I welcome the opportunity to answer that. The system that the two parties have maintained in Guyana, and I disagree with Sohan trying to blame the British and the people who left the system more than 50 years ago. At some point, you have to take responsibility for your own actions. We're adults. This is a country that has been here for 50 years. If we haven't changed it on our own, we have no one to blame but ourselves. So the system that exists in Guyana entrenches an Afro and an Indo party in a country that whose population is divided along the same Afro-Indo lines. The end result of that, as we all know, is that 80% of Guyanese, fortunately it's a smaller margin now, maybe 75%, vote purely along those ethnic lines. That means that there is no accountability by the party and the party leaders to their supporters. Forbes Burnham could have wrecked our economy to the point where we were lining up for oil, for soap, for the basic necessities of life, and still had the loyal support of nearly half of the country. Under Jaglio's governance, there was rampant corruption, and yet that most corrupt government that our country saw still had the support of half of the country. It doesn't matter how badly they perform because they have the support of the party loyalists who vote for them because of ethnic loyalty.
Correct.
And they have further entrenched themselves by introducing rules under the Representation of the People Act, under the Constitution, where for a third party to break into this monopoly that those two hold is actually more difficult. So the constitutional reforms which were implemented in 2001, which allowed the two parties to monopolize the GCOM, the amendments to the Representation of the People Act, which requires all kinds of loops for you to jump through, signatures from 120 signatures from 6 regions before you're even eligible on nomination day. That is designed to exclude any real competition so that these two parties, each of whom knows they're not accountable to the people, can continue their mutual fight to their mutual benefit. They exclude any meaningful competition who can introduce issues of merit. How does a small party break through with that? Fortunately for us, the two parties are almost evenly matched. If one has 4 to 5%, the other has 40%. As you know, at the last elections, the winner, who won all, won by 5,000 seats. Therefore, the first step for us to break in is to have a swing vote in Parliament so that Parliament is independent of whichever party wins the government. If only 2 parties are available on election day and the people only have 2 places to put their eggs, then mathematically speaking, the party that wins the executive will also have a majority in Parliament. There needs to be a third party that ensures a plurality, that the party that wins the government does not own Parliament, that the combined parties in opposition have control of Parliament. That's the first step.
Correct.
What ANUG will do, ANUG, if it has that position, that it, with whichever other party is in opposition controls Parliament, ANUG will simply say to the government, these are our proposals for constitutional reform. Until you meet those proposals, if you want anything passed in this house, you have to talk to the opposition. We are not supporting you unless the leader of the opposition also supports you. So that you will immediately have de facto inclusive governance, even though you may not yet have constitutional.
Correct. But in a way, and to both of you, in a way, won't you say that history has not been kind in that regard? I mean, look, in the past, while it's not for constitutional reform, but the AFC pre-2015 would have sided with the PNC in the House And I mean, there are many things. For example, I remember Chronicle being one of the issues, or NCN being one of the issues, where budgetary allocations were cut to $1. But yet, when they both side came on the same platform, then the same media that they sought to strangle under PPP, they now revel in the same corrupt act. So the question is to you both. It's good saying that. That's a wonderful vision to have, but is reality and the reality of Guyanese politics and your reality of being able to take a side, is it going to allow you to do this?
Well, it definitely will, because as we have all known, as we've been pointing out, whoever is in government feels as if the coffers belongs to them, and that everything that they can do at the dictates and the will of themselves, without the opposition being able to in any way infiltrate or have a say. It has happened with the PPP. We see it now having same thing going on with this government.
Mm.
And again, when I mentioned to the program earlier, and I pointed out the system of voting we had after 1964 as compared to what we had or what we were given in 1966, I am not there trying to blame the British for handing us the constitution they gave us in 1966. I just wanted to point out the difference between what we had then as compared to what we inherited after independence. But continuously from then to now, neither of the two major parties has sought it necessary to want to make amendments or changes. The PPP were talking about changes to the 1980 Constitution prior to them being elected in 1992. They have spent 23 years in government, and they have done nothing to meaningfully change the Constitution to be representative of the interest of the people or the electorate. This government is not going to do anything because the Constitution was written in favor of them. So we are at an end where it is the smaller parties now which will have to make the difference as far as constitutional reform comes from next election.
Well, the good thing is that all the parties feel that constitutional reform is an important step in reshaping, redesigning Guyanese politics. The question I have for both of you is constitution aside, well, not constitution, sorry, on another important constitutional reform, what is your party's position on dual citizenship in parliament?
But definitely, I don't see that a person who is a native of this country but has adopted another citizenship of another country should be barred from being able to enter parliament. I think that that is a right which we were born with. Unlike someone who is a naturalized Guyanese coming from somewhere else and having a major input. Other countries around the world, if you will look at Canada, for instance, or the United States, in the US, you can go as far as being a governor once you were born somewhere else. In
Mhm,
Canada, you can't even go that far to become the prime minister if you were born somewhere else. So
mhm.
there are limitations to what it is and to the allegiance you hold when the day comes. But to bar a born Guyanese from being able to enter parliament, I believe that is unconstitutional.
Tim, what's your view on this position?
I think that we have bigger problems than that.
Hmm.
I'm a dual citizen, Joe.
Good political
Actually,
political answer,
I'm
right?
not. I'm not. I don't fall under the constitutional prohibition. We use the expression dual citizen, but that the Constitution doesn't use that expression. It says anyone who by his voluntary act is under allegiance, acknowledgement of allegiance to a foreign country. As Sohan points out, someone who has applied and put in and get through those two expressions that Guyanese need know about. Um, but no one will question the patriotism of those same dual citizens who sat in parliament, even though they should not have been sitting in parliament. Whether you like them or not, the dual citizens on both sides, Gail Teixeira, Joe Harmon, those are patriots. Those are people who love Guyana, even though we may not agree with their policies. Um, I myself, I went to St. Margaret's Queen's College in UG, and I practiced law for nearly 25 years in this country. The fact that an ancestor is not Guyanese, and therefore, by dint of that law, I am entitled to citizenship elsewhere, doesn't really affect where my loyalties lie.
Gotcha.
So, but I think we have bigger problems than that. That's not what is relevant for us. What's relevant is to identify a system that removes the monopoly that the two parties have, and understanding that the rules of the game now entrench their monopoly, find a way to undermine that, to erode it, until we can leverage them into a position where they concede that we will have constitutional reform and what that reform is.
Gotcha. Let's move a little bit out of the constitution and constitutional reform. Let's talk about what's the topic of the day. Basically, there are two things happening presently. One is I don't know if you would have read up on it. Is the $69 billion central bank overdrawn position, and your party's take on it. But the other one, even more important to the Guyanese out in the villages and communities, is the ID card matter, where people are led to believe that if they do not collect their ID cards, or if they do not have an ID card, they will be removed from a particular list. So is your party concerned with the recent statements emanating from GCOM, and what's your position on it? And Tim, I am mindful of what you said, that it's because of the two-party system in place that even GCOM is basically representative of two parties and not the wider population diversity, political diversity.
Well, I wouldn't even say GCOM was before the election of Claudette Singh representatives of the two parties. This is the harm. Although we have a razor edge majority, we always have a majority, in this case 5,000 votes. And the winner of that razor thin majority takes everything. When President Granger appointed Patterson unlawfully as chairman of GCOM, he created that razor thin majority of 4-3. And every major decision that was made in GCOM was made along that line. 3 on one side, 3 on the other side, and Patterson casting the vote in favor of whatever his masters needed him to do. That caused a lot of harm. GCOM's job wasn't complicated. GCOM's job was to continuously update a list by taking information of births and taking information of deaths and updating the list that they had in 6-month cycles. That's not difficult. There were flaws in the system, but in terms of the job given to them, that was not a difficult job. So when Patterson decided on a vote of 4-3, him using the casting vote to proceed with house-to-house registration, although a no confidence motion had been passed, and he knew, therefore, legally, he may well be obligated in a very short space of time to call in elections. He was breaking up a system. When he failed to continue that process of continuous registration in the 6-month cycles, he was destroying the system. So Claudette Singh has inherited something that is broken, and it is for her to fix it. She has been appointed with the consent of both sides. At long last, it was done legally. But we need to put the blame where it belongs. And in this case, the blame belongs squarely with an unlawful unilateral appointment of somebody who should not have been in the job, and the damage that was done in the interim.
Thank you. Mr. Sohan, any comments from you on the ID card fiasco and the announcement from GCOM?
Well, on that note, I find it quite disturbing, given that the commission chairman right now is one who had made a ruling some years ago with regards to the very ID card that we speak of. And it was made clear then that an ID card was not necessary for one to cast a vote. So to what have to remove persons who have not collected ID cards over a period of time, and it's sitting there, I don't see the need or the justification for wanting to do so. If the ID card is there simply because people are unable to, for different reasons, or don't find it necessary to uplift them, I don't see that as being the justification to have them removed from the list of electors.
Right. Okay. Now, a question I plan to ask you both in discussing the constitutional reform. It's just by the side I wanted to ask this. Would you support removal of this concept of immunity of the president from all decisions he takes as president?
Absolutely.
Thank you. Because I think one of the issues that a lot of people are raising is that, like you said, Tim, there's been a unilateral appointment of GCOM's chairman, the previous GCOM chairman, sorry. There's been lots of things done by government present and past that nobody who's being held responsible. I mean, yes, executive is very separate and distinct from judiciary, but that's why it is separate. There should be somehow we can hold these public officials accountable and responsible. Unfortunately, the way it is in Guyana, we don't. So the bigger question there for you both is, given this paradigm and given that it will take us a medium to long term to have this all changed, how do you propose the post 2020 holding the president accountable or holding public officials accountable?
Well, there again, we have to go to the constitutional reform so that we can be able to remove this executive authority of power which the president wields. And we see that the president has done that only recently in the instance with the Minister Jordan when he was supposed to have paid over money, which the court ordered that he do. And the president stepped in not only to shield the president himself in this case, but to shield an official or a minister of government. So that is one of the reasons, or one of the areas where this whole idea of presidential immunity or executive powers is being abused.
But doesn't that same fact couldn't one say therein lies the flaw in assuming that we can agitate for constitutional reform? Because look, the presidential pension was a big thing pre-2015. All of a sudden, it's nothing. So none of the major parties are going to ever agree with you to do anything that will affect their status, their majority, their power.
Well, as Timothy has indicated just now, the difference between any two of the major parties in terms of support base may be give or take 5 or 3%. It means that as of right now, there are about 30% of the voters of this country who are undecided or who are looking for a way to power. The disadvantage that we, the smaller parties, face is the predicament which was created by the AFC when we thought that, the people thought generally that they were going to be the ones to make that difference for the people of this country, and they just went as far into everybody as they sold us out. So that is a bit of distrust or uncertainty which we face, but I believe strongly that people are looking for new changes, new differences, new faces, and they want to align with people who now seem to be talking something which is making sense. Outside of the days when we were not able to travel widely, the mere fact that many Guyanese have been able to travel overseas over the past decade or two, and being able to be exposed to other systems where there is democracy, at least on the face of it, people are saying, yes, what these new parties are saying is what we want. What FedUp is saying by wanting to reintroduce the constituency system of voting is one where we can be able to break down this executive authority which any one government holds at any one time. This is where we stand now to break down the racial barriers which face us based on the system that we have today. And once we can have the constituency system back in place, I believe that we can be able to reduce the level of racism or ethnicity in this country, and people will start thinking objectively, they will start thinking policies, and they will start thinking more so, what is in it for me now? There's not what is in it for the people who control the different parties or the different governments.
Understood. Tim, back to you. I'd like to ask you this question: that while we just now, I'm going to come to what's the main thrust, or what would be one or two of the main thrusts of aside from constitutional reform of your respective parties. But I want to ask another question that was sent to me by somebody just now. The question is, do you think that APNU AFC is afraid to go to the polls, and that's why there has been every delaying tactic in the world from January to now?
I think that they were caught by surprise by the no confidence vote, and they weren't ready.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that stirred up an ant's nest. Now, if the variables remain the same, if you had the same voters list, you had the same places of poll, you had the same method of counting, and elections took place fairly in March of this year as they should have, I don't think that there's a Guyanese who believes the AFC APNU would have won those elections. They would have been very, very reckless to have held elections in March of this year if those variables remain the same.
Okay.
So we've seen the change of variables. We've seen the list being changed. We've seen discussions about software in the computer system, and we've seen variables being introduced in terms of getting rid of bloated lists and removing these ID cards and that kind of thing. So there have been maneuverings. To what end? We have to wait and see. But there is no doubt in my mind, and I don't think any Guyanese would seriously doubt, that the overwhelming surge of support, goodwill, that brought this government into power in 2015 had all but disappeared by the beginning of this year. And the PPP supporters who were disgruntled and stayed home in 2015 are ready to vote. And the AFC supporters who recognize that they have been betrayed have changed their minds and have changed their alliance. And there is no doubt that there would have been disastrous results for the APNU AFC coalition if the elections took place in March.
That's the that's the question, because as a follow-up to that is the question we asked last week, and I see somebody just posted on our Facebook page too. Will elections be held on 2nd of March 2020? Do you believe that the elections will be held in March 2020?
Only if the president says so, Yog.
Well, the president has said that is the date. But he has.
Let's hope he doesn't change his mind.
Parliament, isn't it?
There's something that we have to recognize, that all the palaver, all the toing and froing, a fight has no rules. And for the last year, the president and his cabinet have sucked their teeth at the courts, at the law, at the no confidence motion, and have said to all and sundry, we are here and we're in power, and we are not a caretaker government. And there's not a damn thing that anybody in Guyana has been able to do about it or is able to do about it. So my answer to your question is we will have those elections in March if the president continues to say so.
Mr. Sohan?
Well, I have some different concerns as far as the elections are concerned, because I foresee that we may find ourselves up and down between Guyana and Trinidad over a long period to come. If you recall, there was an election petition was filed by the PPP in 2015. That matter has not yet been heard. But given the state of affairs in the country as of right now, according to the letter of the law by our constitution, this government is not there lawfully or legally. It's illegal or whatever name you call it. It is not one which has any integrity or any validity as we speak. So I am concerned that if this government is not legally in place and Parliament, the cabinet has not yet resigned, and there is no view in sight that this president intends to prorogue or dissolve Parliament, when those results will come, if election now is to be held on the 3rd of March, 2nd of March, what will be the status of the results when the votes are counted? I do foresee that we are going to be caught up again with legal challenges from both sides, and that will extend the life of whoever is there, unlawfully though it may be, for whatever period of time until this is finally settled. As if the government or the CCG has made it clear that the no confidence motion should be considered as passed as of the 18th of June, and you're to count 90 days therefore, which will expire on the 18th of September. and nothing has been done, this government remains where it is. It's doing or conducting business as per normal. Then I don't know where we're going after now.
Understood. But isn't it true that this happened in the past, where as long as the elections are held and the results are announced, a winner is announced, then whatever election challenges you may want to bring, it may take a year, it may take a week or whatever, but then isn't it true that the doctrine of necessity steps in, as happened in the past precedents, and could happen again?
Well, I don't see that the doctrine of necessity can show its face anywhere in the course of affairs as of the 18th of June up to now. If we were to ask the doctrine of necessity, what is the necessity? Or where is the necessity? All we had to do with abide was to abide with the letter of the law as far as the Constitution provides for, and to carry on the affairs of the country as the Constitution has provided for. And we can see that there has been a blatant disregard for the Constitution, which is the highest law of the land in this country.
Mhm.
So I don't know where else or what we need to do
Correct.
to correct that situation.
But Tim, let me come back to you on that point, because you mentioned something very important at the beginning. That is the singular thread through all of our discussions thus far. That is the viewers out there, the common man in the street, as well as everybody in Guyana. They're all concerned that yes, things would be going wrong with this or with any government, but we are powerless, because at the end of the day, let's go back to as you said, the appointment of Patterson. The CJ, if I recall, had given an opinion as to whether Patterson should be, whether the appointment was constitutional or not, and the president said he reserved his right to his own interpretation of the Constitution. So what I'm asking you both gentlemen is, what are you going to tell voters out there? What hope do we have that the right thing will happen? Because if president or anybody up there said they're not going to do whatever the people want, what can you do about it? Nothing.
Well, you the the answer to that is twofold. One is a positive and one is a negative. Freddy Kissoon wrote a very insightful article in Kaitra News recently. He said that Guyanese cannot, in good conscience, look at our political system and look at our political history and vote for either of the two big parties. That's the negative. You see, half of Guyana looks like you, and the other half has my ethnicity. And we cannot, unless we're absolute hypocrites, sit here and have a civil conversation with each other, knowing at the back of our minds that when election time comes, we go and we vote race. And I am happy if you and your 49% are completely excluded and get zero. And you are happy if I and my 49% are completely excluded and get zero. We are a nation of hypocrites if we do that. And
Correct.
Freddie Kissoon made that point. We are a nation of hypocrites if we can go out and put on a respectable facade as if we are decent human beings and embrace a system where half of the population is excluded in the ethnic cleansing that happens in the public service and in the award of contracts and in the family and friends economy and in everything. We are a nation of hypocrites if we embrace that. And Freddie was spot on in that regard. I don't always agree with Freddie, but in that regard, he was.
Understood.
To answer your question, the rules don't permit me and Sohan, two individuals, to go and change the constitution. It needs two-thirds majority in parliament. So the question is there. The elephant in the room is there. If you get a swing vote in parliament, you get 3 seats and you have this swing vote that the AFC accomplished, although the AFC betrayed us, what will you do with it? And what people don't realize, what the AFC didn't realize, because in their 10 odd years with that position of the swing vote, they didn't propose and pass a single law. They didn't put a single piece of legislation forward of their own drafting. Parliament holds the purse strings in this nation. And I can give you 2 examples. You are a businessman, You have run large companies and you will immediately recognize what I'm saying. Under the petroleum legislation, the board, the committee that awards oil blocks is appointed by the minister.
Correct.
So you have a system where the minister appoints his friends, I'm the minister and I appoint you, and so on. We sit down and we have a drink every Friday evening and we decide how we're going to make money off of this thing. Secret deals are possible because the government minister has sole power and sole discretion appointing his committee where the purse strings are, where the money is. And that is why in 2015, when this government took over, they were able to say in amazement, a lot of oil blocks have been sold off by the previous regime and nobody knew anything about it. An absolutely unacceptable situation. Secret deals, secret handshakes in a secret place. A single amendment to the petroleum legislation by a majority opposition in parliament could mandate that that board, that petroleum board, comprises two people selected by the leader of the opposition, two people selected by the government, and one person selected by the largest third party in parliament. If that was done, those five people would be looking at each other, and every single deal, every single transaction would be done under the scrutiny of of people who represent all and sundry in Guyana. Because the two PPP folk will look at the two APNU folk, and there will be no secret deals and no secret handshakes. There will be no phone calls from the minister to his people saying, give this man an oil block, because that cannot be done if the PPP are looking at you across the table and the third party has the swing vote. Now, I can give you another example of that. After the elections, we discovered that $18 million signing bonus had been hidden from the people. That came out by accident. Same legislation. That would have been impossible if the contract had been supervised and awarded by two PPP folk, one APNU, one third party folk, and two APNU folk. Because the control that that petroleum board would have, they would be able, with independence, to say to the minister, go to hell, we are not your servants and we are not here at your edict. And that independence would be the first step. But more importantly, and this is why I say we need to be accountable to our people. When it happened under the previous regime, the PNC folk said, look how corrupt they are. When it happened under this regime, the PPP folk said, look how corrupt they are. And the party loyalists on both sides said, y'all worse. Who will say, look how corrupt they are, if it's two PPP folk, two APNU folk, and one third party folk that make this decision? Suddenly we're all corrupt.
Gotcha. And that is well put, actually. The question at the back of my mind that I'm not going to put to you, but I'm just going to mention it, is that in the past, I think you know that in the past there has been attempts to involve civil society in a number of things and private sector in a number of things, but they themselves get subsumed with the wants and with the corruption, and at the end of the day it all fell apart. I mean, I think one of the things being pushed by a number of persons out there is that you know, the independence of groups, the Transparency Internationals and those groups that should at the very least have a seat at some of the tables to ensure that you know, public accountability is always there. But you know, we can leave that for another discussion. I want to get to you know, if you feel that it is possible, you can share this. What would be maybe one or two of the main thrust of your party? I mean, you know, like last week we had some of the guys said, you know, one of the parties was, you know, their focus was on youth and youth empowerment. Another one focus was on, you know, the agricultural sector and you know. So let me come to you first, Mr. Sohan. What would be, you know, what's the main thrust of your party aside from constitutional reform? And good governance. What's the main thrust? What's your main, you know, talking point you're bringing to the public?
Yeah, we have to look very seriously about how we are going to be able to fuel this economy and what it is that we can do to bring jobs and employment and prosperity to the people of this country. We've been hearing over the past years about the oil and the expectation of what oil will bring. That seems to be to the exclusion of everything else. Of recently, when FedUp was formed, we started talking about not neglecting the agricultural industry. I, being from Bobis, I know exactly what Bobitians have been going through given the closure of the estates and the rate of employment and all the nightmares that comes with that. We have an abundance of land in this country, but we have not been energizing our people to want to go to the land or to remain with the land the way our foreparents, for instance, were brought up. And that is one of the greatest downfall I believe we are to be faced with. When you're to hear that the Minister of Agriculture couldn't put $35 billion dollars, doesn't know where $35 billion went, that is very distressing. But we are pushing agriculture industry as one of the areas in which we believe that this the people of this country be able to get immediate employment. And by this, we want to say we have to be able to look into areas now where we can provide electricity at a cheap and affordable rate. We have to be able to produce electricity at a rate which can be dependable. And for that, we are proposing that we must turn to renewable sources of energy. That is solar energy, the wind farming is where we have to look at. We must take our sight out of fossil fuel as of right now. When we
Understood.
look at the theft and the loss and so forth, which is part of what GPL incurs every day, that is where a great bulk of the people's money is going. If we cut down on that and we can save just that one area, there will be lots of money more which can be put into the economy so that other areas can grow. We have to be able to show or to give the private sector more incentives to encourage them to want to invest. That is part of the place where jobs will be increased. And the taxation system in this country is one of the other ways which we have to address in order to give people that more that can be encouraging to them. We have been giving the multinationals and so forth all the tax breaks that they want.
Mhm.
All the tax, all the multinationals have been doing is that they have been taking their wealth and take it somewhere else. They are not investing any of their wealth back into our.
Right.
We have to ensure that we provide for our people and give them almost the same or equal opportunity that we're giving other investors who come to this country.
Right. So
So the
you're
job
looking at
situation
jobs,
is
agriculture. You're looking at reform of the electricity sector and tax incentives, basically. Those are some of the measures that. Tim, what about the main thrust for your party and what's your focus areas?
There's a lot of rebuilding to do. You have to look at this as in terms of immediate needs, medium term needs, and long term needs. Oil cannot be over focus. Oil has to be seen as a windfall, and we have to figure out that we must use this windfall to hold up, push forward, modernize our existing industries and infrastructure. We have hurt sugar, so that as Sohan points out, Barbados is devastated. Um, the sugar estates, which were operational in just a few short years of inactivity, have become so bad, so badly off that they probably cannot be restored now. Because if those machines stop working for a number of years, you can't bring them back. The means by which the decision to close them and the means by which they were closed was financially disastrous. The big promises which were made to the rice industry have not been met. We saw just the other day the sea defenses have not been maintained, and therefore the Maikoni area was deluged with salt water, and the residents there have been affected for the next 3-4 years. They won't recover. We've seen in timber that the ridiculous policies of the forestry sector, the forestry commission, again under the aegis of that ministry, has resulted in the loss of Barama. Their heavy-handedness, instead of dealing with Baishanlin in a sensible way to ensure that Baishanlin paid its taxes and did the honorable thing, they just closed them down so that another 800 jobs were lost. If you go now to Kukwani and Aichuni, the unemployment rate there is so horrendous, the poverty is so horrendous, because those were areas that depended on employment in the timber industry, which doesn't exist now. Revenue from timber in terms of royalties and in terms of export taxes, half of what they were in 2015. In the mining industry, our president met with the gold miners and flatly told them, although gold replaced sugar as the largest foreign exchange earner in Guyana, flatly told them, too bad he has no solution to give them. They're going to have to find a way to diversify because we're going green, and that's the end of that. Now, this is a man who never ran a business, telling businessmen who are bringing in the largest foreign exchange earner in Guyana, too bad for you, there's no solution for you. So there's been destruction of timber, there's been harm to the gold mining industry, there's been damage to agriculture in terms of rice and sugar. We are seeing a few good policies in terms of diversification, onion, garlic, that kind of thing, opening the Tacoma savannas. Hopefully that will realize a benefit, but it is woefully small in terms of the damage that has been done by the lack of economic planning of this administration. In terms of what needs to be done, we need to build roads and bridges so that the agricultural folks in the Northwest and the timber folks in the Northwest, the agricultural folks up in the mountains, have a highway that they can access, that they can bring their things out. We need to open ports of entry and immigration spots in the Pomeroon so that the agriculture that is grown in Essequibo doesn't have to travel across the Essequibo River on a boat, across the Barbies, across the Demerara Bridge to reach Georgetown in order to export. They need to be able to be doing their own thing. We need agro processing in the Essequibo and in Barbies. That is what we need. And the infrastructure has to be built up using oil money so that these things are possible. So
Correct.
Chandra is absolutely right about electricity. Here's the thing with that we don't recognize because the transactions are so obscure and secretive. GPL generates, transmits, and sells electricity. Now, in a situation where a government-owned entity does all of those things, there is a large scope for fraud. We need to have private folk generating electricity at fixed and pre-agreed prices. People have been coming in begging to do windmills, to do solar farms, to use forest byproducts to generate electricity. All have been rejected because the reality is that deals can be made by government, kickbacks can be earned by government folk, buying generation equipment, doing your own generation, and the scope for that kind of control of the industry is lost if you are suddenly buying electricity at a fixed price from a private person who is generating. But the generation of electricity should not be in the hands of GPL and government-owned entities. It should be privatized, it should be farmed out to diverse folk. And instead of a centralized system on the coast, there needs to be several areas of generation that tie into a grid and that are paid for on a flat rate so that Guyanese know what they're paying for and the system becomes more transparent. As long as we have a system where GPL is trying to generate for itself, we will continue to have blackouts like I've had tonight twice.
Right. Interesting. The electricity situation seems to be, well, it not seems. The electricity situation has been tapped on by all of the parties. And I must say this, that as you would be aware, I know that in the past, 5, 7 years, well, more than 5, it probably 8, 9, 10 years ago, there was a lot of interest. You're right, Tim. There was a lot of interest in putting up solar farms, wind farms, and so forth across the country. But a lot of those interests were killed because then the government's agenda was hydro. And so it meant, the rest of the ideas and the other investors were not accommodated. Nevertheless, it is interesting. But I didn't hear any one of you talk about education. What's your thinking about education? The current government is saying education will be free. The last government is saying education will be free. What's your take on education, and where do we position ourselves? Because Tim, I think it's something that might have been mentioned in the past, but I know that one of the things that Guyana has been looking at, or should have been looking at actively, is that sector of tourism that is called education. I mean, you could have a lot of people coming to this country to get themselves qualified for a number of fields.
Well, in that sense, our party at the beginning of our launch has made it quite clear that we intend to continue to fight for free education. That is not something which is that is something which is enshrined. That is what is written in the 1980 Constitution. So when the PPP or the PNC is now jumping on the bandwagon to say we are going to make education free, it is not something that you now have to try to provide. That is what institutionally we ought to have to face. It is the PPP who has implemented the fee structure at the University of Guyana. It is the breakdown in the whole education system which has caused uh, students, for instance, at the primary or the secondary level, to have to turn to extra lessons because of the inadequacies in the school system itself. We are now talking about engineers and who we need to be able to be a part of this new industries which will be developing in this country. We knew during the PPP time that these oil blocks were being sold out. We knew since the beginning of this administration that they have started earning fees from these oil blocks from the different companies which have interest in this country.
Right.
But yet, we have not been making the provisions now to ensure that we make the university equipped with faculties to deal with these different demands, which would come as far as trained personnel are concerned.
Correct. But let's stick with this education, because Tim, I want you to comment here. But I think we are all aware that in our laws, or well, in our constitution, education is a right, a free education of public schools. And I think it would have been probably within the last decade and a half that the university education became one of where they're charging students for the education there. But to your point, Mr. Sohan and Tim, I would want to bring you in on this, that free education seems free, but all the parents are paying for extra lessons. And so, how will we shape this? Because if it's free, then it means it can be taken advantage of too.
Well, that
Well,
definitely seems to be the position right now. And then we need to ask the same question. If we're training so many teachers and so forth when the day comes, where are they? Why are they not functioning in the school system as they should be? Why is it that now, though we have to find money and we're having the fee structure in place, we are not able to pay enough persons at the university level adequately? Look at Bobby's, for instance, at the university in campus. You don't have enough lecturers there to lecture to students. You have people who are coming to the workshop all the time. They don't come here regularly. You don't have a proper system where you can Skype and get instructions if they're not able to reach you. So
Understood. Understood. But if we can zoom into the point of the will for education to be free. And Tim, let me ask you to step in here on this note.
sure. For 53 years, we've seen a decline in education standards. There's no doubt about that. The ordinary folk, when you listen to interviews in 1973 elections, were so much more articulate, more literate, better able to understand the concepts. We as a people have failed our youth because education standards have deteriorated on a steady basis for 50 years. The few schools, secondary schools, that offer any kind of decent education, you don't have spaces to get into them. So you're so lucky if you get into them. And then, as you say, even in those schools, the quality of teaching has become so poor that you have to go to lessons. No, I had said that there are short-term, medium-term, and long-term solutions. We've heard Clive Thomas talk about giving cash handouts. I disagree with that entirely, but I do think that there needs to be a way to incentivize parents to send their children to school. When you go to the very poor areas, the rural areas, parents take their children out to school to go and work. Children leave school and go in the mining fields and go and mine because of poverty. Instead of cash handouts, what needs to be done with oil money is first of all, the education needs to be free. Second of all, parents and not parents, I'm sorry, teachers, but allow me to include nurses and police in this. Their salaries need to go up exponentially. I mean, double, triple what they are now. When your child says to you, I want to be a policeman or a nurse or a teacher, you must know that he's aspiring to a job that is sought after, that is
Right.
respected, and that will get him a house and a car and be able to take his family abroad every year for
Which is how it
holidays,
is in the developed countries.
which is how it should be.
Correct.
Now, to incentivize the parents, because it's the poor that really suffer in this regard, I think that you can pay, if a teacher, if a school certifies that a child is attending regularly, the parent of that child should get a sum of money every term to pay for books, school clothes, transportation, to get that child into school. And in school, the service should be offered that the child gets free meals, free recreational facilities after school. So that we're not just looking at the quality of teaching that he gets because we've raised the standard of teachers, but we're looking at providing for this child because that is what will meaningfully incentivize his parent not to take him out to school to put him to plant or incentivize him to leave school and go in the mining fields. He will stay in school because it is in his parents' interest to put him there so that they get this check at the end of every term paying for it and they know he is cared for while he's in school. He's fed, he's clothed, and his recreational and into social skills and development will improve as a result. That is where oil money should go.
Noted. Thank you so much. I mean, we're running out of time, but I need to get this point on the table for our discussion. So we might have to speed it up a little bit. But crime. What's your response, and what would be your response to the massive crime wave? I think a lot of people are quote unquote unbothered with what's happening with crime in Guyana, but those who are affected, those who know, who feel it, know it. What's your party's position on crime, and what are you going to do about it?
Well, guys, of right now, we can see that, of course, who should be tackling crime or paying attention to what is going on in the country as far as people's safety, being a safety, of course, the safety of they're busy right now looking at survival. So there seems to be a complete distraction from what is or what should have been the focus. The crime situation, as we know, it seems to be spiraling from time to time, but it would appear as if we do not have the specialized skills which are needed to fight crime hands-on. And we have been saying this over and over again. As parties saying, why are you sending a policeman at the scene of crime? That is when he has been able to possess the necessary technicalities. He's had a wide range of knowledge as far as crime is concerned and policing activities are working thoroughly. Those forces who you need to keep in the system for a prolonged period of time, you shouldn't send them home at the age of 55. At the age of 55, if you look at how many policemen today are being involved in crimes, whenever you hear people start or arrested. So the people who themselves ought to be fighting crime are involved in it, they are allowed to do it. There needs to be more accountability, there needs to be more discipline, and there has to be training and better camping of the police officers themselves in order to address it. We know that in times gone by, you had to satisfy certain qualifications before you could be a policeman.
Miss,
Today,
Mr. Sohan, you're breaking up quite a bit. Could you yeah.
I see that a little bit. Yes, but the thing is that maybe the internet is giving us problems as well. But the thing is that we don't seem to have been focused on what it is that is required to be done on a daily basis. Our energies and our focus is not there. And I would encourage one to ensure that policemen, for instance, stay who have spent years in service, 25, 30 or more years, that they don't be allowed to go home at the age of 55, that they should be able to stay on. We need better training of police officers. We need more standardized requirements and equipment when it comes to policemen going out. tackle crime hands
Right.
on.
Sorry to interject. We're really running out of time. So you're looking at the equipment, you're looking at training, you're looking at a specialized identification of those fit to be policemen, and of course, continuous monitoring of their performances. Right.
Well, we do have to have that. We can't have a 10-year-old telling a policeman go to hell.
Understood.
Same is just like when we were little children, when you hear about policemen, you run and hide.
Right.
But
So
there has been such a breakdown in the legal system and such disrespect for the entire rule of law and the people that it's taking us a Herculean task right now to be able to put that back together. So we have to make the effort now to utilize every energy we can find to muster to put that fragmented force back in place so that we can get
gotcha.
the maximum out of it.
Gotcha. Thank you so much. Tim, let's talk about your party and its approach to the crime situation and of course future, because one of the things I think we didn't get to mention in our program so far is that with oil, we might very well see a population explosion because everybody's going to come to Guyana. There'll be opportunities here, which means the way we think, the way we govern, the way we secure our people, it's all going to require some massive overhauls. But what are your party thoughts with regards to crime and getting a handle on it?
Well, Sohan discussed the empowering the police force, training, higher salaries, better. He's looking at the enforcement side of crime. I think that we lose sight of the fact that we have failed our young people. Our education system has failed them, so that they drop out of school or they come out of school unqualified to do any real work. Even the ones, the small minority, who go to university, graduate from university and can't find jobs in Guyana and therefore have to migrate. So you have a youngster, 15, 16, 17, comes out of school or drops out of school, cannot find a job. That's not his fault, that is our fault. And we aggravate that problem, we exacerbate that problem by retrenching sugar workers, by closing down timber industry, by harming mining, so that unemployment becomes such an enormous problem that the poor are there everywhere. The indolent are there. You see youngsters, you drive in a rural area, you see youngsters sitting down, smoking marijuana in the heat of the midday sun because they have nothing else to do and they're bored. And then you catch that youngster and you take him to court and you lock him up for 3 years and you turn him into a hardened criminal. So a youngster who is bored and who has nowhere to go, not because of his own doing, because our society has failed him. That youngster is caught, locked up for 3 years for having a little bit of weed, and suddenly you have a hardened criminal. He's let out of jail in 3 years. There's no halfway house. He hasn't been trained in jail. He hasn't been rehabilitated. You now have a criminal. We in Guyana have so many criminals that it is our fault, and we have to find a way to give them employment in the short term.
Gotcha.
What ANUG United Guyana has suggested is what they did in India. You need a system of guaranteed employment where in each of the neighborhood democratic councils, a register is done of people who are resident there who register as unemployed and make themselves available to take up employment at the NDC every day. Employers can go. As you know, a lot of the farming activities are seasonal. So you don't have full-time jobs. But if a farmer knows that he can go to the NDC on Saturday and say, for the next week, I need 7 men, and the NDC can send 7 men to clean drains, to cut, to do whatever is necessary, that employment register, again, you use oil money and you pay them. You pay them a minimum wage. But once they turn out to work, whether or not the NDC is able to give them the work, and there will always be work in Guyana, there's always drainage and irrigation issues, there's always trash to clean up, there's always roads to be built. Once they register, you pay them a minimum wage, and that gives them hope because they can then interact with potential employers, they can demonstrate their worth. They already have been failed because the level of education of the majority of those youngsters out there
Yes.
is not such that they will get a white collar job. But give them the opportunity now. Don't say, oh, these people are good for nothing and therefore we got to lock them up because they're going around stealing. Of course they're stealing. Give them a chance. Acknowledge that it is our fault that they're where they are, and let us solve the problem so that they have an opportunity. And if they don't use the opportunity, then punish them.
Great. Thank you so much. Gentlemen, it's been a pleasure having you tonight. I'm afraid we are out of time. However, before we go, Mr. Sohan, 30 seconds, parting words.
Well, as we all recognize, the new parties are of the view that we can make a difference. People generally are supportive of the idea of the new parties coming forward. And we are asking the people who may not want to come out to vote because of the two-party system today, that rather than stay home and waste the vote, please listen to what the new parties have to say and come out and put that vote, take a chance. Still, like I said, without the ticketed lotto, you don't have a chance to win. But if you stay home and you don't take that chance, then it leaves us out to be here over and over again, saying what we are saying the same thing that you believe needs to be done, but we don't do anything about it.
Thank you so much. Tim, 30 seconds, parting words.
We have 53 years experience in Ghana. 53 years hard experience. Something has to give. Something has to change. What is interesting is that Sohan all the way in Berbice has come to the same conclusion that I've come to sitting here in Georgetown. And I've spoken to people in Essequibo and in Rupununi, the same conclusion. The two parties have hurt us enough. We know that we can't get a two-thirds majority to fix it all. But we believe that we have enough to get that swing vote so that incrementally, by small measures, we can force change. We have fixed a plan to get it done. This isn't a pipe dream. This isn't a hope, like Barnum talking about Guyana being breadbasket of the Caribbean with no plan of how to do it. We have a plan. And we are saying, as Sohan has said, vote for a third party, recognize the harm of the two parties. Let us get our toe in the door, and we will make a difference.
Thank you, Tim. And to our viewers out there, thank you. It's been a wonderful discussion with these two gentlemen from Mr. Sohan from the Fed Up Party and Mr. Timothy Jonas from the New and United Party. Gentlemen, thank you both. To our viewers out there, let me part by saying thanks to Devin and our GlobeSpan team and to all of you for tuning in tonight. And I must tell you that I'll be back on Wednesday night when we are hoping to have a discussion on youth perspective in politics. And we're hoping we are so far confirmed our panelists will include Mr. James Bond and Mr. Robin Singh, among others. So see you all on Wednesday night at 7:30 p.m. Tim, Mr. Sohan, thank you all so much. Have a good night. It's been a wonderful chat.
Thank you very much, Joe. Sohan, take care, my friend.
Tim, all the best.